We're going to start on time. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to start on time. That is amazing. I think that's the first time this summer that's happened. So thank you for being here. This is a hybrid event, so there's also folks online. So for those folks online, thank you so much for being here and joining us today. This is Hatfield's Research Seminar, and my name is Cinnamon Moffett. I am the Research Program Manager here at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center, located in Newport, Oregon. We also have two support individuals that are helping with those individuals that are online. So if you are online and you have any technical issues or you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat, and Michael and Roseanne are here and we can help you with any of those things. So couple logistics. Many of you have been at these seminars before, but if you have any questions and you're online, we ask that you put them into the chat or you raise your digital hand at the end of today's presentation. If you're in the room, we ask that you wait to ask those questions until the end, and you will need a mic. So either raise your hand and I'll bring you the one I have, or you can go to the mic stand right up there and you can ask your question that way. That way, those folks that are online can also hear those questions. And I have a funny feeling today we might have some good questions. So also wanted to let folks know that we are recording today's event. It will be on our past seminar page in a few days. So I know that there's not a lot of researchers still on site this week after all of the interns have gone home. So if folks ask you about it, send them to the recording and they can watch this in their own time. Okay. So a couple other quick announcements. We are taking a little break from seminars between summer term and winter term. So the next seminar will actually be on September 22nd when we have Bryson Robertson from PMAC here to talk to us about the work that they've been doing. So please join us during that time. In the interim, we also have a Science on Tap on September 13th. So that's one of our evening events. That one is going to be about fertilizing the ocean with iron. So what we know about it and what we don't. So that'll be a really interesting one, and that'll be a public event that'll happen here on the 13th. There are flyers around. If you have any interest or questions about that particular event, take a look and join us for that. But while you're all here, and the whole point of today is to learn about our speaker, which is a familiar face for many of you in the room. And I'm going to introduce her. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see everything, because you have a lot of stuff going on. All right. So for today's speaker, Katelyn Bosley is a lead with the Puget Sound crustacean biologist for Washington Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. She oversees the management of state recreational and commercial crab and shrimp fisheries in Puget Sound and is the primary technical advisor for the co-management of those resources for the state of Washington. She also supervises a team of biologists and technicians that engage in fisheries management, surveys, and research. She received both her master's and PhD in fishery science from Oregon State University, where she studied age, growth, and population dynamics of burrowing shrimp in Oregon and Washington state estuaries, and she spent a lot of time here. She then spent 3 years working with NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service, modeling marine fisheries populations before making the jump to Puget Sound crustaceans in 2019. She currently lives in Port Townsend, Washington, one of my favorite places in the world, where she enjoys exploring the peninsula with her family and working on perfecting her practice of crabble boarding, which is crabbing from a paddleboard. So I'm going to hand this off to her and she can talk to us about what's going on. Miguel, can you get the lights?
Thanks, Cinnamon.
Live?
I think so. Do I have to turn anything on or can everybody hear me? Yeah, thumbs up. Okay. Well, I don't have to introduce myself because thank you so much for that very thorough introduction. It's amazing to be in this room. I spent 15 years here in Newport as a master's student and PhD student and a postdoc. Left in 2019, when I started working with the crustacean unit at WDFW, and this building was under construction when I left. So it's quite amazing to come back. And so today I'm going to talk about one of the fisheries that we manage, the Dungeness crab fishery, and we're going to focus on a story about how we do it in the Salish Sea. Even though I lived here for 15 years, I really didn't know anything about what happens in Puget Sound. And so I thought that this the group here would be really interested to hear how things are done up north. So with that, I will just go get started. Okay, so this is the character that I'll be focusing my talk on today, the well-known, iconic, and highly regarded Dungeness crab. For those of us that live and work and play in the Pacific Northwest, we recognize Dungeness crabs serve an important role both within the ecosystem and for the human communities, where they have high economic value through commercial and recreational fisheries and high cultural value. So the recreational and commercial fisheries for Dungeness crab provide an economic and an engine for our communities. They support seafood industries and tourism, just like here in Newport, it's everywhere. We're steeped in it, and the fishery really defines this place. They also hold important cultural significance for the native people who have lived and inhabited this area for millennia. So every time you come to the coast in the Pacific Northwest, in some way or another, you're close to crab, in whether it's through industry or some other way. So here in Newport, we are at the access point to the most productive Dungeness crab fishing grounds in the world. But today I want to kind of shift our focus and look at a different system in Salish Sea and focus on the Puget Sound. This area is located in the northwest portion of the Washington state, and it's adjacent to the Canadian waters and also the coast, Washington. So when living down here on the Oregon coast, I spent a lot of time thinking about the coastal estuaries and the ocean. Puget Sound is a very different system. It's a glacial fjord. It's very deep in areas. It's comprised of a number of different subbasins: Hood Canal, San Juan Islands, Central Sound, South Sound, and Whidbey Basin. It's connected to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, so the straits between the Olympic Peninsula and Vancouver Island, Canada, and up to the Strait of Georgia. It goes up on the inside passage there. The waters are freezing cold, I guess not too different from here, but my family likes to swim in the Puget Sound waters, which I think is crazy. And there's abundant marine life. Of course, from the charismatic megafauna that we're all familiar with to the high diversity of all sorts of invertebrates that inhabit the area. The area is diverse geographically, but it also has really confusing spatial management. It's ecologically complex, and there's a lot of small management areas. So for a resource manager, this is very difficult to deal with. It has a lot to do with how the geographic diversity of the area, but also who is engaged in the management of these resources and where. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about co-management of fish and shellfish resources in Puget Sound. So in Washington state, we have a very unique management scheme where fish and shellfish are co-managed with the treaty tribes of Western Washington. Each tribe is a separate and independent government, a sovereign nation, and we engage in the process of co-management, which involves government to government fish conservation and management. And so this really colors and flavors all the work that we do in managing fisheries in the Salish Sea, Puget Sound area. And to really understand kind of how all the components fit together, I have to kind of step back and provide a little bit of history of where the co-management process comes from. So going back to the time of European settlement, when settlers arrived with the westward expansion to the Puget Sound area, just like many other areas all around the region, there was Native American tribes that were inhabiting this area. And as the settlers came, there was a greater desire for the U.S. government to obtain more land to accelerate settlement. And when the newly formed Washington Territory was established, this gentleman here, Isaac Stevens, was appointed as the first governor of the Washington Territory. When he came out here, he had a couple of different jobs that he was supposed to work on. One was to survey a route for the railroad line to come across to open up trade with Asia. The other was to negotiate the tribal people that were inhabiting the area to transfer their lands to the U.S. government to accelerate the settling of the Washington Territory by Europeans. During his time as governor of the Washington Territory, he negotiated the signing of 10 different treaties with tribes of Western Washington. This graph here, I'm going to kind of explain what you're looking at here, is the state of the Washington Territory. And the large colored shaded areas represent the lands that the tribes gave up, basically, when they signed these different treaties. And so they ceded their lands and they were consolidated into reservations. The yellow components there on the map are the reservations. The broad colored areas are the areas of land that were given up. And then the red dots all over the area are actually where the tribes are now. And you can see as they were consolidated and they gave up their lands, they kind of centered a lot around the Puget Sound area. So the signing of the treaties had the tribes were surrendering the rights to their land, but in that negotiation, they did reserve the right to gather fish and shellfish in their usual and accustomed fishing grounds. So this image here is of Chief Chetsamoka, and he was a very well-known and highly respected chief for the Sklallam tribe. And so my home in Port Townsend is sitting on the traditional lands of the Sklallam tribe. And he was known to be very friendly with the Europeans and really stepped in during times of warfare. He was a signatory of the Treaty of Point No Point, which you can see there, and so their custom fishing grounds were much of the what is now the Olympic Peninsula area, national park. So one of the really important pieces of these treaties that were signed was that it allowed for the tribes, the right of taking of fish at usual and accustomed grounds and stationed is further secured to said Indians in common with all citizens of the territory, provided, however, that they shall not take shellfish from any beds staked or cultivated by citizens. So basically, these treaties consolidated tribes onto reservations. They forfeited their lands, but they retained the right to harvest shellfish and on all lands. And that's the way things were for a very long time. So as the Puget Sound area and Washington State became more populated with Europeans, and fast forwarding now to the 1960s, these treaties had been established in the late 1800s. The fisheries were managed by the state of Washington, and tribes were being restricted in their right to recognize their treaty rights and to harvest fish. So the state fishing regulations were not allowing them to engage in their cultural process of harvesting fish in their usual custom areas, and it developed into what was called the fish wars. There's books about this. If you're interested, there's a lot of really interesting literature to look at that. But as the tribes became more frustrated with their being restricted in their treaty rights, they eventually asked the federal government to step in and confirm the Treaty of Fishing Rights and uphold the trust responsibilities to the tribes. And that developed into what is a very important case, U.S. versus Washington. And through that case, Judge Bolt, it's called the Bolt decision, really studied the treaties to understand what exactly, what were the rights and what it means to be able to harvest with the treaty rights. So as in 1974, Judge Bolt came out with his decision, and the federal court reaffirmed the tribe's treaty rights, recognizing the tribes as co-managers of the natural resource equal with the state of Washington and giving them equal rights to harvest. So 50-50. So basically the state of Washington, citizens of the state of Washington get 50%, tribes get 50%. This was a big change for the state that had been managing fisheries up until that point. And at this time, this federal ruling came in, was very specific to salmon. But in 1994, A similar ruling came out with Judge Edward Rafeedie in 1994 and ruled similarly for shellfish resources. And that reaffirmed the treaty rights for 50-50 sharing of shellfish. That includes Dungeness crab, shrimp, intertidal clams, oysters, and a whole host of other things. So famously, Judge Rafeedie claimed that a treaty is not a grant of rights to the Indians, but a grant of rights from them. Okay, so coming from the federal ruling, we have this directive. And so the directive is the Shellfish Implementation Plan, okay? So what this does is it provides a framework of principles, course of actions, and basically ground rules for engaging cooperative management of shellfish resources with treaty tribes in Washington. This image here shows the usual and custom area for the Slalom tribe that I was just describing. And from these areas, each tribe has a usual and custom area, and each tribe may take from natural beds up to 50% of the sustainable harvest of biomass of any shellfish species within the usual and custom areas of the tribe. That comes straight out of the court directive. And so this can get pretty complicated. So each tribe is its own sovereign nation, and each has its own usual custom area. You'll never see a map of what tribes have, where their usual custom area are with each tribe, because it's constantly changing. There's disagreements, but we have sort of a loose understanding of where things are and what tribes are engaged in management in different areas. And that's what we'll talk about next. So fast forwarding to cooperative shellfish management now. So we engage in cooperative management with tribes. The players are the state of Washington, Washington Department of Natural Resources, some other state agencies that manage public lands. We engage in co-management with 14 different tribes throughout the Puget Sound area. They're listed there. And then part of our process is negotiating and developing these harvest management plans, which are done annually. So launching into a little bit more detail about sort of our current management framework. So here's a graph or an image, a map of Puget Sound showing our different spatial management regions. The earlier map that I showed you is like very complex in the spatial management, but you can consolidate things into these larger management regions. And so we develop and negotiate management plans for each of these 7 regions. And so when we're developing these management plans, we're looking at things like setting allowable harvest levels, what conservation measures we need to employ, if there's areas that need to be closed or limited harvest, setting seasons, and also coming up with a process to share the water. So we not only have to share the resource, we have to share time, and there's only a limited amount of days in the year and a limited amount of water that can be used. So sometimes these negotiations can be pretty tense. So now I'll just talk a little bit about how the allocation is actually done. So we have a total quota. So in each of these management regions, we have set and allocated a harvest allocation, a total quota. The tribes get 50% of that, and we, the state, get 50%. I'm in charge of managing the state share, the state 50%. The tribes have 2 different components of their fisheries. They engage primarily in commercial fishing, and then they have a ceremonial and subsistence. Most of their harvest is in the commercial fishery category. The state, we manage state commercial fisheries, which are very similar to the fisheries here on the coast, and then the state recreational fisheries, which are not as similar, which I can answer questions about that. So it's about 50-50 for us on the state sides, commercial and recreational. So this graph shows sort of where we are, where we have been over the last, several decades with harvest. Since Rafeedie was implemented in 1994, you can see that we've gotten much closer to a 50-50 sharing. The gray bars represent the tribal harvest. This is overall Puget Sound wide. And the orange bars represent the state harvest. So overall, amount of crab being taken out of Puget Sound has been increasing. And the value actually has been really high too. I'll be curious to know what's the value is out here on the coast, because last 2 years, we haven't dipped below $5.50 a pound ex vessel, which is really high. So a lot of pressure on this fishery. But in order to maintain a 50-50 sharing, that means we have to do catch accounting. We need to know exactly how many pounds of crab are being taken for all the different fisheries, both on the state and on the tribal side. So a little detail about the tribal fishery. So overall, there's 21 treaty nations engaged in co-management in Washington state. 14 of those participate in the Puget Sound crab fishery. Overall, there's about 800 to 1,000 crabbers, tribal commercial crabbers. They engage in commercial subsistence and ceremonial fisheries, and 95% or more of their harvest is a commercial fishery. And they catch account, they monitor their fisheries landing by putting all the landings on treaty fish tickets, This fish ticket system for treaty harvest is separate than what we use for the state harvest. It goes into their own database that we have access to, and that we share information. But we do not manage any of the landings or any of the catch accounting at all for the tribes. So the state commercial fishery is a limited entry fishery. We've got about 249 licenses. We allow commercial harvesters to own multiple licenses. They can stack up to 3 on a vessel. We have a 100-pot limit per license. So somebody could have up to 300 pots that they fish during an opening. Similar to the tribes, all commercial landings need to be accounted for on our state fish receiving tickets, and that information goes directly into our Washington fish ticket database. And then I have access to it to monitor harvests and keep track of where we are relative to our allocations. There's a significant time lag, unfortunately, with the fish tickets, and so we require the dealers to submit a quick report. So the day after a sale is made, they send us information, so I know exactly, basically in real time, how much landings have been up to basically yesterday. So if I have to shut down a fishery, I can if we've reached our allocation. State commercial fishery is a little bit short. It runs from October to April. We also have a very, very popular state recreational fishery. And this is a source of contention with the tribes because we don't have extremely accurate catch accounting. We're getting better all the time. It requires to participate in the recreational fishery. You have a shellfish license, but you also have to add an additional license called a crab endorsement. It costs $10. And overall, in Puget Sound, we sell 250,000 crab endorsements a year. So we have that many potential crabbers participating in the fishery each year. Crabbers need to record all of their catch on these catch record cards. It's kind of like a halibut tag. And then at the end of the season, they submit that information to the agency, to us, basically. There is a $10 penalty for not reporting. That's to incentivize people to actually submit their catch. Our catch accounting methods are subject to dispute with co-managers, and in the Shellfish implementation plan, there are different, there's process laid out. It's a legal process for how we settle disputes, and I've been involved in a couple of those, so I'd be happy to answer questions about it. Not going to go into it here. So for the state fisheries, it's hard to figure out like how much goes to rec and how much goes to commercial and what are our marching orders? How do we manage our 50%? And so we do that with our Fish and Wildlife Commission policy, which was adopted in 2010. And this policy provides guidelines for how we do our management in Puget Sound. It defines our recreational commercial seasons. It defines the priority areas for commercial and recreational harvest, and it defines our bag limits, and then a bunch of other things. But basically, this is what we go to in order to figure out how we're going to set up our seasons, what our priorities are for management. Our bag limit in Puget Sound is 5 crab a day, by the way, not 12. And our size limit is 6 1/4. Which is eyeballing me up there. Okay, so in terms of the timing of our fisheries, so as I said, there's, we need to share not only the resource, but time on the water. And so we do that by setting up seasons. So all the three parties, the state recreational, the state commercial, and the tribes all have their time on the water to work towards catching their allocation. So our management planning time starts in May. It goes all the way through till April the following year. And during that time, a tribal fishery can take place pretty much any time, as long as the soft shell criteria have been met. So we require in most areas that there's a minimum of 80% hard shell in order to open a commercial fishery. So the tribes will do soft shell tests, and if they pass threshold, they'll open their areas and they'll fish. And they'll sometimes do it in just short bursts when markets are high to maximize their price. And so this can be sometimes a bit unpredictable. We tried that for many, many years, and it was difficult to manage these turning on, turning off fisheries. So the state decided to set up their fisheries more predictable. So we have a summer recreational season and we have a winter recreational season. Our summer recreational season opens in July. We open 5 days a week, not 7 days a week. We're open basically Thursday through Monday. We have 2 closed days. That's on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. When the summer recreational fishery is closed on those 2 days, everybody needs to have their gear out of the water. So that provides opportunity for tribes to have a fishery if they want to. If market's high, it gives them 48 hours of fishing, which they will do sometimes. After the summer recreational fishery, we close our catch accounting period. We see where we are relative to our allocations, and then we open a winter recreational fishery. And that runs 7 days a week, starting October 1st through the end of December. And then we're shut down for the season. No recreational fishing outside of July to December. October 1st usually is when we open our state commercial fishery. And so we have whatever's not taken on the recreational side, then everything else goes to the commercial fishery. On that can go all the way out through April, depending on how much allocation we have left and how the weather is and how catch rates are. There are, so in our policy, we have different sort of priorities for different management regions. And so each one of these management regions, remember, has its own harvest quota and management plan. And then for each one of these regions, we have a different priority for whether or not it's a commercial or a recreational focused fishery. So you can see the little bar there reaches out to the sort of South Sound, Hood Canal area there. So that's our regions 4, 6, and 7, Hood Canal. Those are recreational exclusive areas. So we don't allow any commercial fishing in that area at all. The tribes have their commercial fishery, but the state does not. It is a recreation exclusive area. So regions 2 east, 2 west, and then up to the north, where the bulk of our crab population is, up in region 1, the San Juan Islands, and up to Canada. That is where the bulk of our commercial fishery takes place. So you can see that bar there has like way more millions of pounds of commercial relative to the recreational. So the commercial is the blue bar, the orange is the recreational. And you can kind of see how the trend in harvests kind of goes with the different management areas and spatially. So here we're looking at a time series of the commercial and recreational harvests from 1993, just before we had the Rafeedie decision through just 2020. And initially, commercial fisheries were the higher biomass that was being removed for crab. We had the new policy enacted in 2010, and that set a recreational priority in a lot of different areas and set up our seasons where we have those set summer and set winter. Everything that's left over goes to the commercial fishery. And then we started getting much closer to 50-50. So a lot more being taken on the recreational side after that time. You'll notice, though, starting in 2018, we see a little dip there on the recreational side of things. And so I'll talk about a little bit about what's going on there. Okay, just like we do here out on the coasts, we use a 3S crab management strategy. The 3 S's stand for the sex, size, and season. We harvest only males. Females stay in the population. They're non-retentive, so they can contribute to producing larvae and offspring. We have a minimum size limit. Our size limit here is bigger than pretty much everywhere else. Actually, in Puget Sound, it's bigger, 6 1/4. And so the crabs are pretty big in a lot of areas in Puget Sound. And then we have a season. So like I said, we can only harvest commercially when we have a minimum threshold of the soft shell criteria. And so we close it down in the springtime to try to allow time for the molting and mating process to take place. And then we have these set seasons that we try to stay clear from that soft shell season, but things are changing. So the underlying principle here is that by taking only large male crabs, it represents a surplus, and that it's a conservative management strategy because they've already reproduced, they've produced offspring, everything else can just be taken. Anything that is males, minimum size, and during a season, the right season. And so on the coast, this strategy has been employed since the 40s, and we've had a very strong fishery for a very long time. Does it work in Puget Sound? That is the question. So looking a little bit deeper into sort of how our landings trends have been in Puget Sound and working with the tribes for many years now, we're starting to notice some kind of worrisome trends. This graph here shows just the recreational landings for our regions. They're 4 and 6, which are the deepest down in Puget Sound. Initially, prior to 2010, those were combined into one management region, but because we saw some things happening with the population kind of tanking, they separated those two into more spatial management areas, and now it's managed as 2 separate ones, this region 6 and region 7. So we had a peak of abundance and then pretty strong fishery. And then after 2016, 2017, we saw a nosedive in our fisheries, both on the tribal side and the recreational side. And by 2018, state and tribes together chose to close the fishery. There's just no crab. There was not enough crab there to have a viable fishery in South Sound after many years of having a decent fishery. My team has a boat, and we go out, we conduct surveys in many different areas of Puget Sound. We collect information about size structure, species composition. We're looking at, sex composition, population structure. And so when we started seeing this kind of nosedive in the population in South Sound, we really focused some efforts down there starting in 2015. We thought if the fishery closed, if it was harvest related, that we would see an uptick in the population. And you can see the fishery closed in 2018, and we've not seen a rebound. The red bars represents the legal size males, and the green is the females. And we would expect to see more coming back with the fishery closed, but we haven't. So the Dungeness crab is on the left. And then we also monitor red rock crab because they turn up in our pots quite a lot. And that's on the right there. And that the abundance of red rock crab is also sort of trending down. So what's going on? We don't know. Similar patterns we see in Hood Canal. So in Hood Canal, we've had a good fishery there for many, many years. We've been conducting test fisheries there since the late 1990s. And over time, we've noticed this kind of cyclical trend, sort of this 10-year sort of decadal, oscillation in harvest. And so what this graph here is showing you across the years, the bars represent the total season's harvests for state and tribes together. And the line represents the sort of relative catch per unit effort, basically, of sublegal males and legal males together. And you can see those track really well together. So there's something interesting going on with the abundance of crab in Hood Canal, kind of trending up and down over, this decadal scale. But as you can imagine, we're setting harvest quotas, and it's very difficult to set an allocation, a harvest quota, pre-season, when we don't know sort of where we're going to end up on this scale here. And so this, we've started looking into these data a little more and are trying to work towards developing a quantitative approach to setting quotas instead of just what recent years harvest has been. And that's what we've used in the past in many areas. So given these uncertainties and sort of trends in the fisheries, managers, co-managers, myself and my tribal counterparts have a lot of questions about what's going on. One is the 3S management strategy sustainable and for Puget Sound crab. How does it perform? Is the size limit that we're using appropriate? Should we consider different closure periods? How are changing environmental conditions and fishing pressure affecting growth and reproduction? And then the other question that's been coming up a lot is how does this management approach work under episodic recruitment? So out on the coast, we have recruitment every year, pretty much. What happens if you have it every 3 years or every 10 years? So that we don't know the answer to that, but that's something we'd like to dig into. And then as managers, we'd like to know more about, ways in which we can predict the changes in the legal size males. So legal size males is my form of currency, right? And so that's what we want to know, when and where they're going to be and how many can we catch. So anything that we can do to develop a tool that allows us to do that better will be good. So many of us sitting around the table and contemplating these questions, not surprisingly, had the same questions. And so we all sat together and said, hey, you know what? We should form a research consortium. We all have the same questions. These are really important for, all the partners here in Puget Sound, for co-managers, and there's a lot of academic groups and agencies that are interested in the same types of things. So we did it. We decided to form this Pacific Northwest Crab Research Group. So this was done, we started in December of 2018. It was just formed organically at a shellfish growers meeting. And over time and through word of mouth, we just started adding more people to this group. And now it consists of over 50 partners who participate and contribute to the work of the group. Right now, we're sort of an informal network of scientists, managers, community members. We represent tribes, state, federal agencies, education, nonprofits, and industry. Our initial funders were the Washington Sea Grant and the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. We have a coordinator that kind of is the matrix that holds us all together. And now the group is housed under the Puget Sound Restoration Fund, and we're growing. We just received some money to do some really fun and important research. So the mission of the Crab Research Group is to promote and support sustainable Dungeness crab populations in the Pacific Northwest. And this is done by addressing data gaps through developing and implementing strategic research. So this is a group of researchers with the Dungeness tribal community, and they're doing intertidal beach surveys and measuring small juvenile crab. And the research that we aim to conduct is really tailored to support and inform fisheries managers like myself. And this is my colleague, works in my team, manages recreational fisheries, Don Velasquez, and this is the gear that we use when we conduct our test fisheries in Puget Sound. So how do we decide what research we're going to do? And so in the early days of the formation of this group, we had many different meetings where we would get together, have focus groups, and we try to throw out on the table all the different gaps in our knowledge of Dungeness crab. Then the managers came in the room and we threw in okay, this is what we need in order to effectively manage our fisheries. This is information. And so we combined these two things together and created a list of what potential research topics could be. And then we met again, and then we prioritized those topics. And so all of that is documented in our crab research guide, and this is available on our website. So it talks about the process of prioritizing, developing research topics, prioritizing research, and shows what our top research objectives are. Not surprisingly, the top question that came out, number one priority topic, is what's the best predictor of adult crab abundance in Washington State? You could say Washington State, you could say Oregon, probably anywhere really that has crab fisheries, but that rose to the top. So that is the piece that we picked off as our first major research project. So we're hoping to discover what is the best predictor? We don't know. But we thought initially the easiest thing to do would be to build on work that's already been done and has proven to be somewhat effective. And that is to look at monitoring megalope abundance in Puget Sound. Very similar, building on the work that was done by Alan Shanks at OIMB. And so this developed that everybody agreed, this is a great idea. We know we can sample them. The methods are already developed. And so let's go for it. So this became the PCRG's first major research project. And that was to develop a statewide larval crab survey. And the idea here is to generate estimates of megalope abundance through a sort of larval monitoring network. So we know that the megalope are attracted to light. They're positively phototaxic. I think this was a video at one point. And then we can create these very bizarre looking contraptions that have lights in them, and then are fishing at night basically and collecting larvae. So the monitoring network uses these devices here. This is a light trap. They're hung off of docks and piers. We deploy them in April, pretty much the same day, I think April 15th, some go April 1st. And then they're continuously in the water all the way through September and sampled daily, or every other day. Lots of different things go into these traps, worms, and all sorts of different larval invertebrates. So the LED lights are on at sunset and off, and then we have an hour's fished. And so we have everybody that maintains a trap, they're manually changing the time based on daylight. And the water goes through the cod end, the larvae go in, they get trapped in this thing, and then they go into the cod end, and then we collect the sample and we count the number of larvae. Up until now, we've been really focused on only Dungeness crab larvae, but there's a lot of other things in there. And then there's a methods video and a document. If anybody on the coast is interested in getting involved, that can be found on our website. So this has grown, actually. It started with just one trap, and then 5, and then 10, and now we're up to 16 different traps, and we've recently just started collaborating with Canada. So up the Hackeye Institute up there in Vancouver and Vancouver Island, now we've got many different stations. So this map is going to look really different actually next year when we create it. We actually have a station with the Quinault tribe out on the coast too. So all of these different dots here are where we have continuous larval monitoring in Puget Sound. So the questions that we're interested in knowing or asking are, when is the peak larval abundance occurring? Where do the larval pulses happen? Is it all up north? Is it down south? Is it everywhere? And then what is the relative abundance of larvae across sites? Because of course, managers are assuming that there's some sort of linkage between larvae and the adult population that that shows up in the fishery. We don't know. But we're on year 4 now this year. And so we started in 2019. We did some pilots in 2018. 2019, we got a full network out, and then it grew. 2020, we had COVID, but even though we had COVID, there were still a lot of people, a lot of groups that are very interested in this and continued to keep their light trap going all summer. And then 2021, and we're just ending our season now. So you look at these data here, this shows Puget Sound, all the different sites, and then the size of each one of those little blobs represents sort of the average catch for each month at each site. And you can see here, I'm just going to highlight in June for 2019 and 2021. Across the year, June is the time of peak larval abundance that we get in the traps. Again, remember, these are sampled daily. And then 2021, last year was a huge year. So compared to the previous years, we got a lot of larvae. And sometimes they come in just a few pulses, or sometimes it's continuous over time. But there's differences spatially and temporally that we'd like to dig into and understand more. Okay, so I've just kind of skimmed the surface on what we're working on. That's our first major project, but we have a lot of other projects that are in the works. We just received funding to do some crab genetics. So building on or piggybacking on the larval trap network, we're going to be collecting genetic samples, looking to see if there's genetic population structure, and try to understand more about the source and sink dynamics in Puget Sound, to truly try to understand what's going on in some of those strange basins in the fishery. Where's the source population for, say, South Hood or South Sound? Is it, its own population? Is it self-feeding, or are we reliant on larval pulses from outside to feed that population? So those are the types of things that we'd like to answer. We're also working towards developing a fishery independent crab survey. So my team does crab surveys. The tribes do crab surveys. Others do crab surveys, and we don't really have a standardized collaborative design right now. And it's actually caused quite a lot of dispute of, which methods do we use? Is this appropriate? This and that. So we're working on developing a standard survey that can address all the questions that we're interested in, working cooperatively with the fishing fleets and using that data to set seasons, harvest quotas, etc. We also have recently started a program, I think that's modeled off of what's been done here. It's called the Crabber and Scientist Exchange, where we get scientists together in the room with our local fishing community and talk about, the issues that are important to them. Soft shell is a big one. Larval recruitment is a big one. Fishery timing is an important one to them too. So that's been a really, really wonderful experience, and we'll be building on that in the future. And there's many other projects that are in the works. So if you're interested in getting involved or just interested in crab and want to know more, or if there's colleagues from the coast here that are interested in attending some of these meetings, we'd love to have you. And I think with that, I'm just about there. I want to leave plenty of room for questions here. And so I just wanted to end with a picture of this rare albino crab that was collected in Puget Sound just a few weeks ago by one of our recreational harvesters. We get all sorts of fun and interesting photos from people catching crab in the field. And so there is an albino crab to end with. So, all right.
All right. I think we have a lot of things we could ask questions about, but I'm going to start to see if there's any questions yet online. All right. If you're online, go ahead and get your questions into the chat box so we can get those answered. For folks in the room, do we have any questions? All right. Somebody's got to start us off.
I was curious, looking into the I believe in 2018, it was kind of shown that Boeing was doing a lot of dumping and stuff to the Duwamish watershed. How is that mainly? Have there been studies done to see if that was an impact on there was an impact from that on the crab population? And then how has the federal government of Washington worked with tribes to help clean up pollution and other spills that have affected tribal groups?
That's a really good question. It's a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but I do know that, when we're going through this research prioritization process, pollution has turned up as a major threat, one that we're interested in looking at and understanding more. Anybody who's been in Puget Sound knows that like Tacoma, Seattle area is like Superfunds, and it's really a very highly industrialized area. I do know that habitat is very important to salmon fisheries, obviously. And so I do know the state of Washington is working very closely with tribes to restore watersheds and habitat for salmon. We haven't really got into it too much with crab yet, but that's changing. Some of the concerns with the South Sound actually is that there might not be enough. There's too much like shorelines development and not enough habitat for juvenile crab, and that might be part of what's limiting recruitment. So we're going to be looking into that with tribes and through the research group. But up until now, for crab specifically, not much. For salmon, yes, I think a lot more work has been done. I can't speak to that.
All right, we got questions online. Go ahead.
Okay, here's a comment. I can't help but notice the Puget Sound disappearance is during the marine heat wave. Would you care to comment on that?
The Puget Sound disappearance of crab is during the marine heat wave? Is that the?
Yes.
Yeah. So water temperatures are definitely elevating in Puget Sound, and there's been some work to show that crab larvae are not as resilient to higher temperatures as their other counterparts like red rock crab. And we think that's part of why in some areas after the marine heat wave, after the 2015, the blob, say, that there was a shift, away from, there was a poor recruitment event, all the larvae might have died. And now it's more red rock crab, which are more resilient and resistant to higher temperatures. Those are actually, we're looking at doing some laboratory studies on that. So yeah, it could be a factor.
I'm going to be selfish. Are you collecting water quality data on those light traps at the same time?
We just started doing temperature. Yeah, we just started doing temperature. And since Linus is here, my team, he's loaning us some sensors that they've been testing out here on the coast to look at hypoxia. And so we deploy the sensors on our traps during our test fishery. And in Hood Canal specifically, we see really strong hypoxia in certain areas. We think that that's influential to the spatial distribution of crab in some of those areas, and it might be reflected in the fishery as well.
All right, questions in the room.
Hey, what has ocean acidification come up as a potential issue for larval recruitment, lack of crabs showing up?
Question, ocean acidification. Yes. When we have these focus groups, we throw everything on the table. Ocean acidification is usually at the top of the list. Some of the research by Nina Bedardczak and others have shown that the crab shell formation is inhibited by high OA or the OA conditions. And we haven't really figured out how that would translate into population level effects. But we're interested in doing some modeling to look at that, and definitely is on the list of priority topics for sure. And there's many, but definitely has come up.
All right, question online.
Okay, is there any interest in a conference on Dungeness crab research and management in the Pacific Northwest?
A conference? Oh, so we have, yes. That would be good. We have a couple times had workshops or sessions at larger conferences like the Shellfish Grower meeting. But we're getting so many people involved now, and our research is expanding that there might be room for a conference and bringing in experts from other areas and systems to speak about their experiences. So that's a great idea. Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Mitch,
going to hand the mic to Mitch. Just letting folks know that Mitch has some background in crabs here in Oregon. So if folks online have questions, Mitch is here as well.
Yeah.
Couple of questions. The first one only has 28 parts.
Okay, go. We can talk about it afterwards.
We're gonna have to talk later. Yes,
yeah.
A few hours.
Yeah.
Do you guys see graceful crabs?
So many graceful crabs.
Yeah. Is that a problem in the recreational catch, or because they're smaller? It's not.
Definitely not a problem. We saw, so similar to what I was saying about the blob and the temperature thing, when the crabs started to go down, graceful crabs started to go up. So we were getting a lot of graceful crab in areas that we were previously getting Dungeness crab. They're small. They tend to be very small. So in our pots, they're not really retained. They kind of fall out the meshes. But yeah, sometimes people don't know the difference between that and a juvenile. It has tricked people, like, oh, look at all these small juvenile, sub-adult crab, Dungeness crab. We're like, yeah, no, it's not. That's a graceful crab. Yeah.
And yeah, just one other for now. You said you did do a test fishery. When is that normally conducted?
Okay. So that's another talk, but I'd love to talk about it. Yeah, so so WDFW has been conducting standardized test fisheries in Hood Canal and in the Port Townsend sort of area since the 90s. We go out 2 times a year. We go out in the spring, so that's a preseason test. So that happens in June, basically, and then we do a postseason test. So that basically between our summer and winter recreational fisheries, and that's kind of look at like, okay, this is where we started, this is where we ended. Did we take a lot of crab relative to our preseason survey? So we do that every year annually. We only missed, actually, I don't even think we missed it during COVID. Those data have never really been used for setting harvest quotas or anything at all. And so we're trying to look at those data now that we have a really long time series and start to understand some of the trends. We only do that in 2 areas. We're looking to expand to do it in other areas too, in collaboration with the tribes. Tribes don't do that. They just test for shell condition mostly. Yeah.
All right, we've got a question online.
So Katie, this from me. I'm wondering whether the issue of sea otters has come up in your discussions about threats to Dungeness.
I'd say predators broadly have, yeah, maybe not specifically sea otters, but predators broadly, yeah. Just as, again, add it to the list of something that we need to be thinking about, trophic interactions and who's taking what where, and you know, what could be potentially impacting subadults, specifically for predation juveniles.
All right, we've got more questions in the room. Okay.
I'm interested to know if you know what the migration patterns look like of the Dungeness crab between your 7 different management areas.
Data gap. Don't know. Yeah. So we don't know, actually. Interestingly, in South Sound, so we're starting to we just went through a conceptual model exercise. We met with a bunch of people down at UW-Tacoma, experts in the room, and we started to what are all the pressures, drivers, stresses to South Sound crab? And, you know, one of the observations that was made in that meeting is that, you know, right before the fishery collapsed, essentially, the crabs were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so were the crab coming in from the north, or are they just growing there until they're old and gone and there's no recruitment? So there's a lot of uncertainty about, you know, how the crab are moving through the central, you know, northern, central, and southern canal. Many, many years before I arrived at WDFW, they had taken on a study where they were using spaghetti tags to tag the crab. And they were releasing them in Hood Canal and up off of Port Townsend, where my office is. And they did see the crabs moving around. But that data has never fully been analyzed. I know that that's something I have in my pocket that I'd like to get a graduate student on to look at, look and see, and doing a movement matrix between the areas. That was only in a very small area relative to all of Puget Sound. So we'd like to try to do some work in South Sound as well.
Any questions online? All right, so we've got questions in the room.
Hey, I was just curious, in Washington, is there currently a marketing behind tribal caught crab? And is it kind of perpetuated as a marketing to get more indigenous caught fisheries promoted through Western economy? And if not, is there an idea to? And if so, has it created conflict between Western fisheries and tribal fisheries?
All really good questions. So a lot of the tribes actually have their own fish buyers. So they have their own fish houses, and they'll buy tribal product and put it in and you know, market it as tribal product. You can go to the reservations and buy that, or they'll, you know, sell it to the industry, you know, into restaurants and whatever. But there's not a lot of conflict actually between tribal buyers and state buyers. Everybody just buys everybody's crab, and we're just feeding markets all over the world. Actually, COVID shut down China export market. We focus here mostly in Puget Sound, mostly on a live market. So it's all very low. It's more of it's local or straight to live markets in Asia. And, you know, of all of the different user groups that we have, the tribal and commercial fleets are kind of really tight. Like they know each other's, you know, what's going on. They work together, they share buyers, and they share a lot of information. In fact, they know I get information from our commercial fishermen about stuff that I'm going to be in a meeting in 2 hours from them coming through the tribe. So everybody's talking and working together. Yeah, but that's a good point about maybe marketing that differently. I know that the value of the fishery is very high, and the tribes specifically target when the price is really high. So I don't know much more about it than that.
All right, I'm looking back to online. All right, we got another question in the room.
So just kind of I guess a follow-up to that question. Has there been any clashes with any other recreational or other usage in the Puget Sound with protecting crabs?
Clashes in
Like certain groups of
User
people
groups?
not liking what management strategies you come up with, or if some strategies have been going against what people have been doing.
Yes, yeah. So there's a lot of contention between the tribal fishers and policy and recreation. Mostly comes down to our catch accounting. We don't put recreational harvest on fish tickets. There's a lot of uncertainty in our recreational estimates. There are a lot of users, 215,000 licenses in Puget Sound. And so it's definitely between the tribes and the recreational fishery. That's our biggest point of contention. Recreational users have some difficulty, and Mitch is going to smile when I say that, have some difficulty following the rules entirely. And so then, you get people fishing on closed days or taking, some illegal type activities. And so that also is another point of contention. And so, yeah, it can be pretty tense sometimes.
How did you decide to prioritize recreational fisheries in your season?
Good question. So that is from many years of sort of working with tribes and working with the constituents. Puget Sound is just population, just people all around, and everybody wants to go crabbing. And so we have this advisory body, basically the Crab and Shrimp Advisory Committee. And so we work closely with them in developing, recreational management and policies. And so they just are heavyweights, and working with the Fish and Wildlife Commission and with us, they just have a lot of leverage, and they wanted a bulk of our share to be really recreationally focused and over time. And, that's basically how things shook out. Actually, after they implemented the policy in 2010, the commercials, because it's like whatever's left after the recreational fishery goes to the commercials, they sued the state because that was not great for them, and lost. So there's contention between the state recreational and the state commercial as well.
All right. Questions online? All right. If you're online, get your questions in there. Otherwise, we're going to keep asking questions. We're almost out of time, so we're going to wrap this up really soon.
Okay, quick thing.
Sure.
Why make the cost for violating the crab thing the same price for buying the crab endorsement? Wouldn't that kind of, like, if I don't get caught with crab, I don't have to pay the 10 extra bucks, and if I do get caught, it's $10. Like, it just seems kind of counterintuitive.
I must have done a really good job in my presentation, because that is a big challenge for us. And we have multiple times have tried to go so it's a legislative change that needs to be made there. And we've tried several times to increase the penalty from $10 to something that's more reflective of the actual value of the resource. I mean, even going to Costco, how much does a Dungeness crab cost? I mean, it is expendy, right? So $10 for somebody's like, oh, I don't care. I'm just gonna, harvest my 5 crabs 6 times a year, and that's like way worth it for me if I don't report my card. That's something we're trying to work on for sure, because we're not getting a lot of compliance with our reporting. We'd like to see more, and by increasing that penalty. And also we're getting ready to start a very strong education and outreach sort of arm of my program to get out and get people educated on how to do it right.
Okay,
Sure.
Quick one online.
Okay, question, how are the participants caught for not reporting their catch?
A good question. Let's see. How are they caught? So if they purchase a license, they have to basically set up an account, and then your information is stored. And then when you go to purchase your license the next year, the system knows that you purchased a license last year, and then you get a charge of $10 for your next license for your next year. Yeah.
Okay, and is there an enforcement committee?
Enforcement committee. No, I work extremely close with the enforcement units, going on patrols, and we bringing issues to their attention. They bring issues and the management to our attention. So we work very closely with enforcement. Reality is with 250,000 users and 20 officers, you can't catch everybody, but we do try. We try to catch a lot of bad actors. One of the big things that we do now, and this program started in 2018, is a derelict gear removal program. So as I said, our fisheries open 5 days a week, 2 days were closed. Everybody needs to remove all their gear out of the water on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We have a whole team that goes out and basically sweeps the water every closure, all summer long. And so they're going and pulling out gear and getting it out of the water. That's a good time for us to run into people that are doing bad things, and they get tickets and they get education hand slap. Yeah. It's a huge, huge project.
All right. We could probably keep going with this conversation for a while, but we have hit our time limit. So what I wanted to ask is if we wanted to follow up with more questions, how do we get a hold of you? What should we look for?
Yeah, so I have business cards, probably not with me. I'm going to advance here. So this is my management team. There's me with the largest spot shrimp ever in Puget Sound. And then Don Velasquez, I have contact information. You can email me, contact us at the website. Daniel Sund, I'm sure many of you know him because he also spent many years here. He's my commercial harvest manager. So you can contact us. Also, if you're interested in the crab research group, we have a website. Emily Buckner is our coordinator. She will get you plugged in. She's our one and only staff member that's helping and managing that program. So.
All right.
Jot it down.
One more round of applause for our speaker today.
Yeah.
And for everybody online and for everybody in the room, we're going to take that little break, remember, but join us again in the end of September and we'll start our seminar series again. Again, thank you everyone for being here. Have a good night.
All right.
Okay, for folks online, I'm going to end the presentation. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.